We are so thrilled to have all of you here today and welcome you to our event today. We are so happy to be joined by Don Boian, who is an accomplished technology leader and award-winning information security expert. He is the Cybersecurity Outreach Director for Huntington Bank, where he works with customers and commercial clients to raise awareness of information security, cyber threats, and vulnerabilities. He is also responsible for fostering closer partnerships with government organizations that work in cybersecurity. And prior to this role, he served as Huntington's Chief Information Security Officer for 2 years. So Don, you are super active in the cybersecurity community, and we're so excited to have you here. I know that you have served on boards of the National Technology Security Coalition, Ohio Cyber Women, Lockdown, and the Columbus chapter of the International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals. Easy for me to say, I am sure very hard with everything that you have done and take on. We are thrilled to have you with us today. So excited to bring this to the community, to bring this to the Delaware Entrepreneurial Center family and community, and to the greater just community of folks who are interested in this very, very important topic. I know that we will have folks continue to join us, as this was such a topic that we had so many people who were interested in learning about this. We are so thrilled to have you with us. I want to let everybody know Don has been kind enough to save some time at the end for question and answer. And so as we go through this, please feel free to add thoughts or questions into the chat box. I'll be monitoring that, and we will make sure that those get addressed as we go towards the end. So Don, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it from here.
Good afternoon, and thanks. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're going to talk through a bunch of different cybersecurity topics, but honestly, make it personal. We're going to cover a bunch of these things that you see here. I'm going to kind of roll through them fast, but please, by all means, if you've got questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get them answered. I don't know whether there are any lawyers on this call, but if there are, this is my by lawyers for lawyers slide. And you notice I don't cover it much. I'm not a lawyer. Don't even play one on TV. Accounts and no cybersecurity presentation would be worth anything if we didn't talk about passwords, right? We all use them, and even more and more these days, a ton of places when we visit a website, we read online media, magazines, things like that, in addition to all the very important topics we have, whether it's your banking information, whether it's your, if you're going to school, I'm sure you have an account at that educational institution too as well. So let's talk about accounts and passwords. The very first thing I strongly recommend to folks is if you have to make a password, make it a passphrase, not a password, right? And here's where I'll be just a little bit sexist. Most men can remember tons of movie lines, right? We remember strange lines out of movies. Remember a line from a movie or your favorite passage in poetry or a song, and string all those together. So a passphrase is much more secure than actually using just, one or two words or your dog's name. Throw in those special characters, capitalization, and things like that, and you've got yourself a pretty strong password there. So remember that. Always use passphrase, not password. The one that I've underlined here and have in red, please, please, please do not use the same username and password across accounts, right? You've got your email accounts, you've got your banking account, you've got your work account. There's actually an attack out there, credential stuffing. Called credential stuffing, where when a breach happens at an organization, say for instance, and this one's an old one, but the Yahoo breach, right? If you had a Yahoo email account, then your username and your password was compromised back when that breach happened. When that happened, the bad guys actually take that username and password and they will throw it at lots of other websites, right? They'll throw it at banking websites, they'll throw it at, you name it, Netflix, Amazon, just try, because they're guaranteed that some percentage of those people will have reused the same username and password. Why? Because it's easy to remember, right? If you only have to remember one username and password, you'll remember it much easier. Well, that's the downside of it. They're banking on that. Absolutely do not share your passwords or accounts with other people, right? because really that defeats the purpose too as well. And then that's just one other weaker link in the chain there. So change your password periodically, right? There's a bit of a debate in the cybersecurity community about how often is often enough, but I would say at least every 6 months you need to be changing passwords on your account. But honestly, that leads me to the best one, since I've just said we all have all of these passwords to remember. I'll be honest with you, I didn't used to recommend using a password manager, but now I do. The reason being, we all have way too many passwords to remember, right? We're not going to remember them. We're gonna put in little cheats for the way that we do that, right? So absolutely, please use a password manager these days. The thing I would add to that is you don't have to put every single one of your accounts in the password manager, right? So you could make maybe your work password or your password to your university or your educational institution's password. You don't have to put that one in there. So keep the bank password out, keep the work or school password out too as well. So then you really only have to remember a few passwords, and you can use that passphrase that I talked about earlier. So go out there. There are a bunch of good cybersecurity websites that talk about the top password managers. When you install it and use it for all those other accounts, go ahead and let it generate the password for you. And a bunch of them are fantastic because they'll work across operating system platforms. So, I have my Apple iPhone, but I have a Windows desktop, and it'll work across that seamlessly. Let's talk about security challenge questions, though. A lot of accounts actually ask you about security challenge questions, and they'll come up with oftentimes canned questions, and they'll ask you for your mother's maiden name, your first pet, all of those types of things. Here's an easy one that'll secure your accounts a little bit better. You don't have to put the truth in there, right? If it asks you for your mother's maiden name, maybe you remember, and here's the point, you have to remember this. If you're going to lie on it, you have to remember it for the next time, right? But if it asks you for your mother's maiden name, maybe you do put your first pet's name in there, right? Because obviously a bad guy who's actually looking at you on social media or Ancestry.com, by the way, and who will find your mother's maiden name pretty easily, will keep entering your mother's maiden name, thinking you replied to it accurately. So, that's a tip. Security challenge questions, you don't have to tell the truth. You can lie on those. You just have to remember it. There are accounts out there and these days that allow two-factor authentication. What are we talking about when we talk about two-factor authentication? We're really talking usually about something you have and something you know. Let me see if I can find mine here. So here is actually a hard token. It's actually a security token here for two-factor authentication. You can find these, this one's called YubiKeys. Or more and more these days, some of these soft tokens that they talk about are actually on your phone, right? You'll get an SMS code, you'll get those types of things. So by all means, if your accounts allow you to do two-factor authentication, please use it, right? Especially if it's an account that has importance to you, right? Has important information, personal information on you. So just a few things about accounts and passwords. Let's talk about email, right? I think nobody can have an email account these days and not receive phishing emails, right? They're almost incredibly annoying these days. And the amount of them, I get them almost daily. It's a professional hazard here. I actually store them and keep them and take a look at them. And I help friends and family, right? Because they're always like, is this a phishing email? And they'll forward them to me and take a look there. So we all need to be aware these days that these come in. Your credit card has been locked. Your Netflix credit card has expired. You need to re-enter it. All of these types of things, there's several out there these days with Amazon. And I can tell you with the holidays coming up, there'll be typical UPS ones, there'll be Amazon ones, you name it. Those are going to be coming real quickly here. So in essence, with a phishing email, they're attempting to get you to click that link, right? You can see the ones on here with Amazon and PayPal. They're trying to get you to click that link. And sometimes that link will either do one of two things, right? It'll either take you to a page where they're going to ask you to log in. And there's a big one out there with Microsoft Office and O365 to get you to enter those credentials. Or it's going to install malware on your system. Sometimes that malware might be innocuous. It's ads and it'll pop up things and it'll just be annoying, but it could be much worse than annoying. It could be actually monitoring your transactions that you do or stealing your personal information that's on your computer. So be careful on what links you click. I'd also say be very careful when you get an email from someone you don't know and it has an attachment. Don't open that. Don't even bother clicking on it. There are things out there called Microsoft Word macro attacks. You definitely don't want to have those on there. A few other things that people don't typically think about. Out of office messages. Oftentimes, if you're at school or at work, you have this great feature that says, "Hey, I'm not going to be responding to your email in the next week because I'm taking a vacation." You remember when we used to take vacations? I'm hoping we take vacations again soon. But there's out of office messages. Be super careful about what information you put on there. Not just, "Hey, I'm going to the Bahamas for a week," right? You don't put information in there that you don't need to put in there, right? Put the minimum amount of information. And oftentimes, a lot of email applications, especially the Microsoft variety, will say, "Hey, if it's inside your company or inside your school, give this type of an out-of-office message. And if it's outside, give this type of an out-of-office message." So use that feature, right? Give less information to the ones who are outside your company or outside your school. The internal one definitely is one of those that you need to give a little bit more information there as well to tell people who to get in charge with. One topic that people don't think a lot about, but you need to be super suspicious about, is unsubscribe links. There's this phishing campaigns that happen out there where they know you're not going to click on the link, but what they'll do is they'll put something at the very bottom that says, you've been enrolled in this mailing list. If you'd like to unsubscribe, here's an unsubscribe link. Well, guess what? That could be a malicious link too as well. So be careful on those unsubscribe links. Typically, do not click on them. In essence, just put it in the trash. You can create rules if you want to get fancy to get rid of those things if they continue to come into you. You can always report them. Some web hosting providers actually allow you to report the spam and the phishing links. Go ahead and report those too as well. I talked a little bit about that Microsoft Word macro attack. There are several out there these days, not just in the Microsoft Word, but also Microsoft Excel side of things. So be careful of those. And a new attack that came around, about a year or a year and a half ago, was really calendar appointments. You can send in an email to someone, right? And it automatically shows up on their calendar, right, as an invited meeting type of thing. There are several attacks around calendar appointments too as well. So I'd urge you to be careful around those. Let's talk about social media. These days, social media is unavoidable, right? Lots of people are using it. And the simple one that I think everybody thinks about is oftentimes people post way too much personal information. You need to be careful on that. And you need to set we'll talk about settings on applications a little bit later, but you need to be careful about who you share that personal information with. Some social media is all about sharing some of the personal information, right? Our family, our friends. I can tell you now my daughter's out of school, but I'll be honest with you, that's the way I stalked her. And the only reason why I'm on Facebook is I stalked her through college that way. I knew she was doing okay, so I'd continue to see posts on social media. Because I knew she wasn't going to call me. But those are areas you need to be careful about how much information you post there, right? Even you remember I just talked about your mother's maiden name and things like that. Be careful about all of that personal information. Be careful of that oversharing of information. I mentioned before, you're going on vacation, right? You're going to leave your house. There are an awful lot of not just online scams, but a lot of in-person scams to say, hey, if they're away, I can burglarize, I can do whatever else. So be careful on that side of things. Let's talk about those quizzes. Or I can tell you your rapper name if you just answer these 12 questions, right? Generally, those quizzes, other than a little bit of amusement, aren't going to get you anywhere. And generally, they will ask you just a little bit of information to continue to provide just a little tiny bit. And over time, they ask you enough of these quizzes, they gather enough information, they're piecing it all together. So in the grand scheme of things, the quiz isn't really getting you anywhere. So don't take those quizzes. Be super careful of the apps themselves, right? Make sure the social media app and those things you're using are actually reputable. Make sure when you are downloading any application, you download it from a reputable app store, right? Whether it's Google, whether it's Apple, make sure it's reputable. And I'll talk a little later about some that aren't so reputable. Be careful of malware out these days. And malware, actually, the trend is rapidly increasing. We are seeing it tremendously on businesses. I know we have a few folks out there who are interested in maybe down their career setting up a business or may already have one under their belt. There's a large increase in ransomware over this last year, holding extortion. You're encrypting your data and asking you for a ransom payment. You really need to be careful about malware out there. I mentioned some earlier that's kind of innocuous. It gets on our computer and either just uses the computer to send more spam, or it will pop up advertisements in front of your face, which just is kind of annoying. But some of the other ones can be much more damaging, right? And you need to be careful because a lot of us don't think about it, but that same PC you used at home to do your taxes, the same one you use to do a lot of your e-commerce shopping, right? You entered your credit card into a website. That same PC, if you're going to get the malware on there, they're going to get all of that information over time. A lot of other interesting things. I mentioned the home invasion side of things. There's a lot of fascinating things that have happened based upon bad guys piecing together information. And there's a lot out there about catfishing, right? People claiming to be what they're not and attempting to do scams around that. Let's talk about the old phone call side of things, right? Well, we all are probably familiar with Robo Calls these days, right? That phone call, you get a ton of them these days. I mean, I'm to the point where if I don't recognize the number, I don't answer it at all, right? If I wasn't expecting the phone call, I won't answer it. But that brings us to a very valid point. If I'm not expecting the phone call, I rely very heavily on caller ID, right? I think we all do these days, right? We enter in our contact information into our contact list on our phone, and it'll pop up their name. Well, here's the thing, though, is I want to make you guys aware of this. Caller ID can be spoofed as well, right? Using voice over IP technologies, and a lot of scammers these days will use it to spoof as businesses or valid organizations, and they will actually spoof that caller ID. So the interesting thing is if they spoof it right, and I have it in my contact list, then what I will see pop up is the actual name of that organization. So I'm like, oh, well, I know them. I'll answer the phone call. So you need to be careful, especially if you're going to be contacted and the caller ID potentially is spoofed and they start asking you to provide them information. Remember, they called you. You didn't call them. My recommendation, if they start asking you for sensitive or personal information, you say, thank you very much. I will call you back. And you call them back at the number that you have, or look on the back of your credit card if it's a bank thing, or look it up one other way. I will be careful though. Remember, if you're going to Google organizations, those first few ones you usually see when you get the Google search results are ads. The bad guys are starting to take out ads, right? And they're starting to actually use those ads to redirect people, right? Either give them false information about that phone number that I talked about, or to redirect you to a web page that's not the valid organization. So caller ID spoofing is big these days, and social engineering in general. I will tell you that, since it's kind of my job to do this kind of stuff, I've really been monitoring a lot of what's going on in the social engineering space. And Megan didn't mention it, but I spent 30 years working for the US government in the National Security Agency. So I worked in the intel circles, and I'm amazed by how sophisticated some of these bad guys are getting. They're doing what we used to call full target development packages, right? They're spending a lot of time learning about you and targeting you. So be careful out there. There's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Always be suspicious. And we always used to say in my old job, we always say a healthy dose of paranoia is actually a good thing, right? Be just a little suspicious on all of those things you see. And I'll tell you, if it looks too good to be true, it's almost guaranteed not true, all right? Let's talk a little bit about your home network. And boy, this is an important topic these days because we're all generally, a lot of us working from home, right? So we're all going to be connected up to either our schools or our businesses via our home network. So it's very important that we have good security on that. So a few key tips around your home network. Make sure, and this is a common theme, not just with your home network, but with lots of things, make sure it's up to date on the current operating systems and security patches, right? Install all those security patches when they come out. I know a lot of people are a little reluctant to do that, say, wait, it might be buggy. I can tell you the risk of it being buggy is less these days than the security risk of it having a hole in it, right? So go ahead and download and install it. Again, rehashing what I said earlier, only download applications from reputable app stores or websites. Keep all of them up to date, just like that operating system on the devices you have. Make sure you're running current antivirus. Have it in there. In fact, a lot of operating systems these days, they come with it. Make sure it's enabled and running, right? Back up your data. And I know a lot of people say, well, I don't have anything really important on my phone, right? I don't have anything really important on my computer. But you'd be surprised. It may not be critically important, but hey, just the pictures we take these days. Nobody prints out photos anymore, typically, right? So you'd be amazed. You know, like I said, my daughter's 28 years old. I would be sincerely bummed if, and you probably see a few of them up there, my hiking pictures that I take with my daughter. I'd be very bummed if I didn't have those pictures. You know, so it's a value. It may not be of huge value to bad guys, but if you lose it, you'd probably miss it tremendously. But it gets more important, right? You know, your tax work, right, which has sensitive information on there, all sorts of other things. You know, you probably have communicated with a lot of people, lawyers and other folks with sensitive information. So be careful what you have on that system. Make sure you back it up, right? Both phones and computers. And I can tell you, ideally, if you really care about the data, put it on some type of removable media, whether it's a thumb drive if it's small, or the hard drives, removable hard drives these days. I can tell you what I do, since I do care about those pictures and things like that. I back up the important data to a removable hard drive, and I give it to my sister that lives an hour and a half away from here, right? Just in case maybe a house fire or something else, I'll still have that data and still have it available. Be careful in your homes and your home network around voice assistant technologies. I'll be careful about what I say it because she'll probably wake up. If you say, Alexa, too loud, right? It's immediately going to wake up and start listening. Well, it was always listening, right? It was waiting for you to say that wake up word, right? So there's some level of monitoring there. And I think we need to be careful. I wouldn't have one if my mom hadn't bought me one. So I felt obligated to kind of install it. But then they're kind of fun too. And you like messing with them. We have it in the kitchen. I use it for timers mostly, you know, set a timer. But you need to make sure those two are secured, updated. Usually there's a lot of them update themselves, so that's a good thing. But you just need to be aware that if you're putting one of those listening devices in your house, they are listening in on things. And you can go find some interesting articles on that and how they've improved that technology by collecting samples from customers. So be careful there. I do talk about disposing of old phones, computer, and media, right? We seem to go through phones these days, right? Every 12 months, maybe 18 months. I can tell you I got an old Apple and it really needs to be, it's a good thing we're all working from home because I have it constantly plugged in because the battery's dying. I need to upgrade it, right? But you need to be careful. Apple and several of the other ones are starting to get attuned to this, and you can really wipe a phone before you either recycle it or donate it to somebody else. You need to do the same thing with your computers and other media, right? I actually have sitting beside my desk here some removable media that I'm like, oh, I need to destroy that before I send that to recycle. So be careful about what you have on there. Dumpster diving is alive and real, right? So be careful there. We talked a little bit about mobile devices, but let's dig in a little bit deeper. And, you know, common theme here, make sure you continue to update that operating system and applications. Set it to auto update. These days, just go ahead and allow it to update on the current version, right? That way, when the security patch comes out, you're going to be up to date and you're going to be more secure. Really go into the settings though, and we're going to talk a little bit about location types of things. but limit applications access to all sorts of things. There's no reason why your application needs to have carte blanche access to all your photos or your contacts or your current location or the microphone or the camera. You generally now they're giving you a lot more ability to restrict some of those settings, which is a very good thing. But it's on you to go in and tell that application, no, you can't have access to it. I can tell you that one of my things that I do is actually go in and not allow games that I have on my phone to access cellular data back when, having unlimited plans and things like that wasn't around. For two reasons. One is it eats up your data usage, but the second one is it's fantastic when you're not on Wi-Fi and you play the game, you don't get all the advertisements and they're not popping up in front of your face because it can't go download them, right? So limit access to that to the bare minimum, only those things that are allowed. Your weather application probably needs access to your location. But I can tell you there's a weather application, which I will not name, which I was very frustrated when I finally looked at their terms of service and found out they're selling my location to advertisers so they can advertise to me things. And I'm like, wait a minute, it was just a weather application. So be aware of those types of things happening. And I want to tell you about an attack down here. It's called SIM swapping. It is at this point rare, but I hope it doesn't continue to get larger here. And here's what it is. We all use, and I mentioned it before, we use our cell phones for that second factor authentication, right? Or a lot of accounts will send you the code that you have to enter if it's a new device. So our cell phones are really that second factor, and they're very important. The bad guys have figured this out, right? So the bad guys have gone to your cellular provider and they've said, hey, I'm upgrading my phone and I need you to move the service from the one you have to their phone. It's called SIM swapping, right? And you need to make sure that you have a PIN on the account. If you have Verizon, AT&T, whoever your cellular provider is, most of them require it automatically these days, but make sure you have that set, all right? I want to make sure you have that because if you have that PIN set on your account, they won't be able to make that swap, right? Several of you, I think it was the CEO of Twitter, I think actually had this happen against him. So it's interesting. You can go out and read those articles on that. Did a full SIM swapping. There have been some others that have been highlighted in Wired magazine. They do typically go after high profile folks from that side, but I'm hoping it doesn't become a little more commonplace. Here's something that a bunch of us don't pay a whole lot of attention to, right? Terms of service. How many of us actually read those? You're like, scroll down, click, click, click. Yes, I accept. Yes, I accept. I do it too, honestly. But just be aware, you may be agreeing to things in that terms of service that you wouldn't normally agree to. Like I mentioned before, sharing of your locational data with advertisers. All sorts of information that you probably wouldn't have signed up for had you read all of that. Just be aware. Terms of service and end user license agreements, there's a bunch of that stuff in there. You're not quite sure what you agreed to. Here's the important thing, right? If you didn't pay for an application or you downloaded a game for free, if you're not paying for it, then you are the product, right? They're actually selling something about you. Whether it's your location, it's your usage, those types of things. You end up being the product. Some information they're collecting about you is end up going to be sold, all right? So let's take a look at some of these applications. And I realize this may be difficult to see on the screen, but I'll talk to it in general, and you'll get a copy of these slides so you can take a look at it. There was an analysis that was done of 1,000 applications. And of those 1,000 applications, they used, I love the term, they used a creep rank, right? How creepy was this software and what was it actually doing, right? In addition to whatever function you thought it was doing. So let me silence my phone here so you don't have to hear this continue pinging. A bunch of these things, if you can read them at the bottom, right? A bunch of these things are clearly tracking location, tracking the camera, spoofing the voice, doing all sorts of things that you wouldn't, of those 1,000 applications, 813 of the 1,000 had some functionality that generally would fall in this stalkerware or creepware, right? So they actually increased on the creep rank there. So that's an amazing, that's 80% at least, 80 some odd percent of all of these applications actually do something that generally the people would go, well, wait a minute, I didn't want it to do that, or I don't want it to have the functions or capabilities to do that against me. So please be aware out there. There are all sorts of things out there. And let's talk about location tracking since I brought that one up. Location tracking is very, very interesting to me. It might just be because my prior job, I don't know. But, we all take all these photos these days. You take them with your phone, you take them with your camera. Almost all modern cameras are equipped these days with GPS, right? And they are automatically, unless you turn it off, by the way, that's a setting, unless you turn it off, are going to tag it with the location coordinates. Have you ever noticed if you actually take some photos and you upload it to like Google Photos or something, they actually plop that down on a map exactly where you took that photo. The standard around that is called EXIF, if you want to go look at that on the geeky side of things. But they tag all of that with GPS. So just to make you aware, I mean, generally you think, man, I don't care. But you'd be surprised after a while, someone could gather all the photos you took. They know exactly where you go, right? That's pretty creepy, right? Let's talk about mobile device tracking, right? Lots of applications these days are tracking you. A lot of them, a lot more than you'd think, right? And one of the reasons why they do that is they can actually get some money and get advertisement dollars for telling organizations, advertising organizations, exactly where you are. So they can give you that coupon or direct you towards that business that might be local. I know their ideas are noble, right? To give you local deals and things like that. Be aware though that all of that tracking is going on. And I do say, it's not just applications. Our cellular providers track us too. Well, first of all, they track us because that's the only way they can make our cell phones work, right? They need to know what tower you're connected with. They need to know how far you are away from that tower, when you move to the next tower. All of that stuff happens behind the scenes. We don't have to worry about it. Our call continues to be made, and even when we drive from one tower to another, the call stays in service. But I'll give you another example that's very interesting. You guys probably all I use Google Maps, right? And back when we actually commuted, it was very convenient to know where the traffic jams were, where the highway is red versus green, right? So it's going to slow down on this interstate, those types of things. That's all generated from cell phone data, right? Gathered by the providers that say, hey, I'm monitoring all those cell phones and, they're driving on this highway, but they're not driving very fast, right? So all of that data collected, usually anonymized, but I can tell you flat out, your cell phone provider too does a lot of that tracking. So if you take a look, there was an awesome article that actually tracked an individual who volunteered to do this, right? She volunteered for a reporter to say, well, you see what you can figure out from that side. The link will be in the slides. You can go take a look at the article in the New York Times. It was amazing to find out exactly how much, was available to find out about it. And over 4 months of data, they had this poor young lady nailed down. They knew exactly her profession without knowing anything else about her. They knew exactly her profession. They knew exactly who her boyfriends were. They knew where she liked to go hiking. They knew when she went to the airport, all of the rest of those types of things, right? Over that 4-month period, 8,600 times data tracking on those types of things. On average, about every 21 minutes, know exactly where you are. That's pretty creepy, right? So let's think about that, right? Think about those applications you use. Think about what applications you allow to track your location on your phone. Give it some thought. I'm not saying turn everything off, right? Because we all use a bunch of these services. I'm saying be knowledgeable, be aware, and make your own decision about what you want to allow there. I do in the slides, here's a QR code. It'll take you right to the article. I think it's kind of a cool article. And since I had prior civilian government service, I put in a few government examples here too as well. You guys may be aware. And you can always take note. When the Pentagon and other people start paying attention to things, there's a reason why they're doing that, right? The Pentagon at one point barred troops from using GPS tracking devices. Fitbits was a perfect example. I can tell you, since I work closely with some of those folks, these guys always, guys and gals, always physically fit. They're wearing their Fitbits, right? They're doing all of that kind of stuff around their compound in Afghanistan that tells folks exactly where they are, right? So that's a problem too as well. There was a really interesting one too as well. This was a training exercise, not actual live combat side of things, but a Marine took a picture, took a selfie with his whole unit, which obviously he transmitted to a bunch of other people, posted it on social media, and they basically disqualified, and say, yeah, your entire unit is wiped out because you shared the selfie, which, oh, by the way, had the GPS coordinates. And I can tell you from my prior job, there are a lot of bad guys in this world who met their demise because their cell phone gave up their location. I'll leave it at that. All right, let's talk about travel security on the hopes that all of us at some point in the future will be able to travel again, right? Or probably maybe some of us are actually be traveling around the holidays. So a few things to think about here. And particularly, I would say if you're traveling overseas, if you're going to a foreign country, don't take what you don't need, especially from electronic perspective, right? If you don't need your laptop, don't take it, right? That's just exposure to either it getting stolen or the information on it that can't be replaced, right? Getting stolen. So don't take it if you don't need it. If you're a business traveler, or even if you're a personal, right, traveler, use a privacy screen on your laptop. You never know what you're going to be doing on the laptop. You're sitting pretty close proximity on an airplane, right? Somebody can look over and see what you're doing. Even if they're not looking at sensitive data, it's annoying, right? The person's looking at your screen. Be careful. Be very suspicious of public Wi-Fi, right? I used to even say, if you're going to Starbucks, Panera, the rest of those places that offer you public Wi-Fi, be very careful about what you connect to. There are a lot of what's called man-in-the-middle attacks these days, whereby which you would connect up to a wireless access point. They would then connect you to the real one, but they're monitoring all your traffic that goes through it at that point. So disable auto join on the Wi-Fi networks. Don't just let your phone join anything that's out there, right? Even Bluetooth. There are several attacks these days on Bluetooth. So if you're not using your Bluetooth, I do recommend you turn it off. Here's a very important one. Charging stations and USB ports, right? We all, walk up to the place and we plug our phones in, right, to these places. Well, a bunch of them actually offer you the jack, right? Whether it's Lightning or USB or something else, they're going to actually offer you the ability to plug that in. Don't do it. Why? That's actually a data connection between your phone and that charging port. Go ahead and take the little brick, right? It's going to plug into the outlet. It's going to have the USB ports on it, right? You'll be much more secure. There have been some isolated instances of pranksters who've actually put charging ports in there that would actually destroy phones. That's not cool either, right? It doesn't steal your data, but boy, your phone's now fried. That's not a good idea. So be careful on the charging stations or port. The other example I'll give you is if you're getting a rental car. I know a lot of us hop in the rental car and I want to listen to my music, right? So I'll immediately connect with the car. Well, guess what? A lot of those cars download your entire contact list because they want to make hands-free easy for you. Not saying don't necessarily connect with the car, but before you return the car, make sure you go in and delete all those things. Usually there's a setting in the car's menu. Remember to do that, right? Always secure your devices when they're not in your possession. I will tell you flat out, hotel safes are not really all that safe. They're easy to get into from the hotel. Staff can get into them. So, keep it in your possession if at all possible. And go back to the first one, don't take it if you don't need it. All right, I'm from a bank, so I have to talk to you about mobile banking. And it's a very important topic these days. Always use a known link. Remember I talked before about the Google search? Don't just Google for Huntington Bank and then hit the first link you find, which is an advertisement, because bad guys oftentimes will buy that advertisement. So go to the link that you have stored in your bookmarks, right? And even then, make sure that that link, and most of you can probably figure out if you click on the padlock, you can go look at the security certificate, go look at those things and make sure they're valid, right? Use the banks, use your financial institution's mobile application, right? Download it from a valid app store, make sure it's from your bank, right? Download it and use that mobile application. It'll have encryption in there. It'll have all sorts of features that you can get to that you may or may not be able to get to from the web version of your bank, right? Interface. A lot of questions these days, especially during the pandemic, around what's called remote deposit capture, right? Taking a picture of a paper check that you have and depositing it into your account. A lot of folks say, is that secure, right? I can't speak for every bank's application, but most banks' applications are secure. They'll have encryption. Your bank's application should not store that photo of the check into your photos, right? It shouldn't store that, right? It's just going to be a temporary one that's encrypted and then sent to your bank. Generally, I would say remote deposit capture is more secure than actually taking the check to the bank. Why do I say that? That check, and if it actually gets out of your possession, if you drop it along the way, has all sorts of information at the bottom about your bank's routing number and your account number and things like that. I will tell you that the use of paper checks these days is declining rapidly. Most people aren't doing it. We're all doing electronic banking. But I can tell you that the fraud against paper checks is rising, right, tremendously. So the percentage of fraudulent checks versus real checks, it's much more these days in the fraudulent side of things. Remote deposit capture, do it on the back of the check. Usually most modern checks actually have a little box for you to say for mobile deposit. Right on there, if you don't have it for mobile deposit, write the institution that you're going to deposit it on, right? Hold on to that check after you've taken the picture and deposited it into your account. Hold on to it until it clears, right? A week later or something. If it's cleared, actually use a shredder, right? I have one over there in the corner. Shred it, get rid of it, because that's the information there that you don't want to be leaked. Let's talk real quickly about account alerts. Most financial institutions allow you to put alerts on your accounts. Do it, right? You know how much you're going to write checks for. You know how much your credit card typical transaction from you is. Set that limit, up in the upper ranges of what you typically do, so you can know, if you never make greater than $500 purchases on your credit card, right? Set that alert at maybe $450, right? Look for that fraudulent account that's going to come through for a large amount, and you get the alert on it, and you can lock things down faster. So set account alerts. They're great. They're convenient ways to do it. You'll get a text message, right? You can ignore it if it's you, right? But you're looking for that fraudulent one that comes in. Credit and identity monitoring alerts. Those are important too as well these days, unfortunately. I think I'll talk about credit card bureaus in just a minute. But any of those features, really take advantage of them if your bank offers them. Oftentimes, your bank will actually say, "Hey, I'm noticing that you're logging in from a new device," so they kind of register your devices. That's also an important feature to not only pay attention to but use, right? If you notice that you've seen a login from a new device and that wasn't you, that's something to pay attention to, right? And notify your bank immediately. So let's talk about those credit cards and credit monitoring. Monitor your credit scores, right? You really need to pay attention to them out there. Some banks will offer you some features to take advantage of that. Get a credit report from the 3 credit bureaus at least once a year, right? So you can get one free each year from all the 3. And I can tell you in the appendix of the slide, I give you all the contact information for the credit bureaus, so you'll have that, all right? If you're concerned about fraud against your accounts, I recommend you freeze all 3 credit bureaus, right? Freeze your accounts at all 3 credit bureaus. If you're not going to be making a house purchase or buying a car or things in the near future, go ahead and freeze it. And honestly, even if you're going to do those things, go ahead and freeze it. Unfreezing it is not that difficult, right? You'll end up getting a PIN. You'll need that to unfreeze it. The information on that is actually both in the appendix to the slides, but also on Huntington's website if you need that as well. Here's a good one. We all do electronic e-commerce these days, right? In fact, I don't know how anybody's going to buy Christmas gifts these days without going online. Thank you, Amazon, right? I'm actually wearing out the Amazon guy showing up at my place. Set up credit cards alert against, hopefully your financial institution has this, I know Huntington does, against all transactions that are called card not present, CNP, card not present. That's a transaction if you call somebody up on the phone and you order something and you give them your credit card number and they ask you for the number on the back side, that's going to be a card not present transaction, right? They physically didn't swipe your card, so it's a card not present. I have mine alert for all transactions, right? For all card not present transactions. So every time I place an Amazon order, I get an alert, right? But I can tell you most fraudulent bad guy transactions, when your credit card number is compromised, it's usually a card not present transaction, right? So not only set it up for all card not present, but do the limits that I talked about before. And then know how to freeze your credit card. And I'll give you a perfect example, a personal example from me, right? I actually couldn't find my credit card the one day. Right. This is actually slightly before COVID. I'd been out, I'd gone to a restaurant, I'd gone to several other places, and I'm like, I don't know where it is. You know, I could have dropped it at the side of the road. Via my phone, I immediately locked my credit card with my financial institution, right? No harm to me. I just locked it, froze it for a while. Ends up finding out, about 8 hours later, it was in the car, right beside the driver's seat. I must have dropped it. Maybe I went through a drive-through or something, I'm not sure. But found it, unlocked it before I even bothered to report it as lost or stolen. I figured I'd give it 24 hours. It was locked. Nobody could make a transaction against the credit card. So all of those types of things, put those things into place for yourself. It not only keeps you more secure, and even I know a lot of people say, well, fraudulent credit card transactions aren't my responsibility anyway. It's a hassle. It's a hassle getting that new credit card, getting it in place. Better safe than sorry, right? Let's talk about skimmers. They're still out there, unfortunately, these days, and the bad guys are getting smarter. I kick off my ATM people at the bank because I say, walk up to that ATM and before you put your card in, grab a hold of that thing that's sticking out and torque on it. If it falls off in your hands, like you can see this picture, it's a skimmer, right? And you need to report that to not only the local police, but the financial institution as well. Take a look when you're at gas pumps, because actually it seems to be these days skimmers are more on gas pumps than they are on ATMs, because banks are getting real wise about it. Go take a look when you look at the gas pumps. Take a look for the seals that you'll see there. Take a look again at the card slot where that goes in. Start using the tap to pay, honestly. A little bit more secure. Hopefully all your credit cards have the EMV chip in them, right? It's more secure there too as well. All right, so that leads us to kind of identity theft. By all means, these days, most, not all, but most places, when you get a paper statement, and a lot of places don't even give paper statements anymore, but when you get a paper statement, most of them don't contain full personal information, but they still contain your address, how much you paid. If it's a credit card statement, they're not going to give you your full account number. That's a good thing. But there's still a lot of kind of sensitive information, exactly where you shop, everything you bought on a credit card for the last month, that's sensitive information. Shred it, right? When you don't need it anymore, I usually wait 6 months or so or a year, and I'll shred last year's credit card statements on that side. I'm still one of those people who gets paper. Be careful where you store them electronically too as well though, right? So let's talk about some scams, and then we're running out of time. I really want to get to questions. Phishing scams are out there. We talked about those. Romance scams. I have to state this. Relationship scams these days, it's not just romance in the pure romance form. Any relationship scam, right, that are out there these days, there's a ton of them. There are a ton of tech support scams. Somebody calls you up and says, hey, I noticed your computer's running slow. We're going to help you with that. Need a credit card. I'm going to charge you here. There are a ton of them out there. Please, and I say this to most of us, you're on a webinar right now, so chances are you won't fall victim to them. But I want you to talk to your family, your friends, especially elder folks, and I give you the top 10 elderly scams out there these days, make them aware of it, or at least ask them, hey, talk to me before you actually do any of these types of things, right? So you can the sounding block there. Irs impersonation scans are huge against the elderly these days. They don't want to be in trouble with the IRS, right? So they'll give up the credit card. A lot of those other ones, I won't go through them. If you have questions on them, I'll be happy to. So we are running out of time, and I want to make sure I get to questions. So with this, I'll turn it over to Megan. We can go to the Q&A period.
Thank you so much, Don. I think I have been enjoying not only following along and watching your slides, but also seeing people's faces and then watching the chat. I say people's faces because I kept seeing a lot of smiles when you were mentioning different scams and things that can happen, because I think we have all experienced those things. It made me think of, I was driving home one time and got a call, and it actually said maybe AEP. And I was like, oh, okay. So I answered it. And long story short, it was a scam. The person said, we are a contractor with AEP that you have time, or you have credit to your account that we want to make sure gets to you. And so then they started asking me questions, and kind of took the tactic that you took, that I started asking them questions. And then they were like, oh, well, and then they just hung up. And so I really like your suggestion of, I'm going to call you back, and then going through that. So really such practical advice. And we heard, well, Janice was amazing. She was kind of highlighting some things that you had shared, just as some really great reminders and notes, talking about that you can back up things daily via the cloud pretty inexpensively, and talking about malware and ransom, and talking about SIM swapping. And one of our guests here shared that this did actually happen to her. So I will get to questions because there are a few here, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, that your presentation was extremely appropriate and on point for what we're all going through. And as we're living more and more and more of our lives online, this is just increasingly important. So thank you so much for that. And I also have to tell you, as you were talking about mobile deposits, knowing personally that I did one just yesterday, I was a little nervous you were going to tell me I had made a bad choice, but I think we're good there. So one of our very first questions was pretty early on, and asking if there's a password manager that you recommend. So you had mentioned using one. So if you could share any insight on that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, this is always the question that comes up. I can tell you that Huntington doesn't want me to recommend one.
Well, let me help you, Don.
But I can tell you that I use LastPass.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's one of them. It's a good one. There are others out there. There are 3 or 4 that are probably the top. If you go out and you look for it, Janice, I don't know whether you want to recommend any others you might know, but there are a couple good ones out there. I recommend, not just for yourself. This is actually kind of a great gift to not only help maybe your parents or other folks, buy it for them for Christmas and help them set it up, right? Help them generate passwords. It's not, I would say, super easy to get a password manager put in place, but it's not incredibly difficult either.
That's great advice. Giving that as a gift is such a wonderful advice. Janice, did you have a few others that you wanted to share?
Well, again, it's kind of like a resume. It's against, everybody's opinion, but there's probably 3 tops. And anything that anybody likes to download, if you're downloading for your desktop, I know a lot of people on your phone, if you're talking about your parents, I always like to recommend people go to, what is it, CNET, Don, is that right? That's
CNET's a reputable one too.
Yeah, that's probably the safest place for you to go. So you've got LastPass, and I think you've got, what's the other one, Keeper. So there's top of the 3. You buy them as a subscription service, but those are probably the 2 most popular. It's just more of like how you like the interface and which one that you like to have. And one of them, either one or the other, is going to offer you 90 days free, depending on what time of the year that it is. It just depends on which interface, quite frankly, that you like. I get asked that question all the time, and actually, the last person that asked me happened to be a CEO of a bank, which cracks me up. The other thing that I wanted Don to point out, because I have this argument every single day with people, and I wanted Don to specifically share with everybody, and maybe Don can go through it, is Google and your phone. I don't think everybody realizes how much it tracks you where you're going every single day. It is buried. It is seriously buried in Android, and it is seriously buried in iPhone. So even though you may not have turned it on, it knows where you're going every single minute. So if you don't want it to know where you're going, you have to search and find. I don't know if Don wants to tell you, or if Don wants to send instructions to Megan so that you can go in and intentionally go and shut that off. It's not saying to not shut off your, it's painful because you don't have your locations, but it's just a problem when you've got somebody mapping where you are every single day, that you probably do want to turn that off.
Yeah, location-based services in either Google or Android, Google Android or Apple iOS. You want to take a look at location-based services, and you want to decide which applications are allowed to do that. So be careful there.
Yeah, so that's the other thing.
That's so important. I think the article that you shared, Don, was so fascinating, where they learned all about the young lady's life and, you know, who she was dating and everything. And I think so many of us think, oh gosh, I don't care. Like, why is that important? But then when you start seeing what it really means, it is scary. Yeah.
Very creepy.
Yeah, Don, maybe one more thing that you might want to share everybody with, because I think the emails, you and I have talked about it before, get more and more sophisticated. You know, you've got a package that just arrived from Amazon. Maybe you can teach everybody how to go up into the header and to double check who the email's coming from, to make sure that it actually comes from FedEx, to make sure that it actually comes from Amazon, to teach people not to click on that, or not to. Maybe you can talk about that as well.
Yeah, a couple tips to pick out phishing emails and figure out where they come from valid sources. If you're on a desktop system and you're looking at the email, most email readers, if you put your mouse over any link, or if you put your mouse over the from address, it'll show you the full expanded either URL if it's a link, or it'll show you the actual email address if it's up there. And you'll notice they look wacky, right? I know the one from PayPal and Netflix and Amazon, it doesn't look anything like it. So mouse over it. Put your mouse over if you're in the desktop. If you're on a cell phone, most cell phones, you can't do that mouse over kind of thing. But what you can do is actually go up to the from side of things, and you can actually tap that. It's no problem. That's not a link. You can actually tap it, and it'll show you at least either the whole from address, or it'll show you a portion of it, usually enough to go, yeah, this isn't valid. And look for all the other things, right? You know, the sense of urgency in the email, usually still, unfortunately for us, bad grammar, bad English, misspellings, all sorts of things where you go, wow, if this was really Netflix,
capital letters,
their communications department would be all over this, right? If they're not, it doesn't look professional. So.
In some, I think the last one I got, I really had to look at the extension. I think it came from FedEx, and I really had to go back to FedEx's website and to see if it really was. I mean, there was just like one. So it's just, you got to pay attention.
Yeah, I got one from UPS the other day, and it really, I give the bad guys credit. They did a good job. It looked very professional. But when I went up to that from, I'm like, wait a minute here. And there's been one domain that has just been spamming people like crazy. It's ASOS. So.
Yeah. I'm familiar with ASOS, actually. That's very interesting. I think what you and Janice both said really struck me throughout your whole presentation is the sophistication behind the bad guys. And I think we could probably apply what I'm about to say to a lot of different genres and industries, that the effort that goes into being bad and and cheating somebody or lying if only we could harness that for good. Wouldn't that be so powerful? Well,
that is very true.
I actually had a quick question too. So I was really interested to hear your take on online banking, but I'm curious to hear about your opinion on like Venmo or PayPal and the transfers that come from that. Like I know I've seen the scams where like someone will accidentally Venmo you X amount of money and they ask for it back and you give it back to them, but that money was from a stolen credit card. So then you're the one that's getting tracked for that because you're transferring this money. But
Yeah.
I know they recently added like software that like if you're transferring money, you have to have like the last digits of their phone number to be more secure. But I'm just curious about your general thoughts on like Venmo.
Yeah, Venmo and PayPal generally are meant to send money back and forth, person to person, with people you know and you have some sort of a trust relationship with. I do not recommend it for people you don't know, because just like you said, you could be unwittingly part of a money laundering scam from that side. If you know somebody and you've established it and you're buying goods off of a Craigslist or some of those types of things, it's generally a reasonable way to go about it because you've already established some information. But if somebody's contacting you out of the blue on that side of things, it's not a good idea whatsoever. So use it for folks for person to person, very worthwhile.
wow.
Awesome.
Thank you,
So I
Don.
know like Cash App and Venmo are such a big college campus like thing. I mean, you probably couldn't find less than 10% of students who don't have it on their phones right now. So super interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, very popular. It's the trend. More and more banking is moving to a person-to-person side of things. I have Venmo. I have Zelle.
So interesting. Thank you so much, Don. I know that we are just now at 1:04, so we're a little over 1 o'clock. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Don has been kind enough to send the slides from his presentation that I will then send out to everyone. So thank you, Don, for being willing to share that with all of our guests here. All of you will also receive a survey just to grab some information that if you have some feedback about today's presentation, about future presentations you'd like to hear, we really love to hear your feedback and use that to help guide our upcoming events. We hope everybody stays very healthy, has a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving and a holiday season, albeit quite a different one probably this year. We will be sharing our upcoming speakers coming up next calendar year. And we do hope to have Don back if he is so willing and has the time. Don, you have been just amazing today. I think we could probably spend all afternoon asking more questions and sharing stories and just getting your perspective and asking for your expertise. So thank you for your time. A big thank you to Janice for introducing us. So thank you for that. And we just welcome any feedback. We look forward to seeing you all at future events and hopefully at some point seeing you not on screens and in person. So thank you all for being here. We look forward to staying in touch and happy holidays. Bye.